What is going on, guys? Welcome back to another video. So it has been an absolutely crazy regular season this year. Biz went so far to say that it's been the most entertaining regular season of recent memory, and I would agree as someone who only remembers like 2008 on in the NHL. It has been nuts. It has been crazy, but it has not been without some severe criticisms and some severe scrutiny of some of the rules. Obviously, my New York Islanders, the overtime loss Kings, as well as Mark Stone yet again going on LTIR. So today, I wanted to propose 8 rule changes for next season. Are these going to happen next year? Obviously not, but maybe could happen down the line. One is going to be pretty controversial. I think most people are going to disagree with me, but all the remaining 7 people I think would understand it is pretty common sense. So without further ado, let's dive into it. And up first, I got the standings change that most people probably want at this point. 3-2-1-0 standings point system. When looking at it, 3 points for a regulation win, 2 points for an overtime win, 1 point for an overtime shootout loss, and 0 points if you end up losing in regulation. I am a proponent of the loser point, considering in 3-on-3 in the shootout, you're not playing traditional hockey. You're not playing regular 5-on-5 hockey. So I agree, giving them some type of reward, considering you're massively changing the rules of the game to decide the winner of the winner of the overall game. I understand that, but I think we do need to devalue the overall loser point. The fact it's 50% of a win, the fact that just in general you can blow someone out 7-0 and it's the same result as if you won 2-1 in the goddamn shootout. That's ridiculous. So we should be rewarding teams that put teams away in regulation, as well as devaluing that loser point, because it is a little bit OP at this point, considering it is 50%, and giving nothing, obviously, to the teams that just straight up lose in regulation. The PWHL obviously did this right off the bat in their inaugural season very smartly. So when looking at it, I think 3-2-1-0. It just makes far too much sense. It's such an upgrade. Me personally, as a cold-blooded American, I can't do ties. I can't do 2-1-0 with ties. That would drive me absolutely insane. Me going to a goddamn game, it just seems un-American to go to a game, walk out with a 1-1, 2-2 tie. We're not England. We seceded from England for a reason, and that's so our hockey games end with a winner or a loser. So 3-2-1-0. Book it. I think it is going to happen at some point in the NHL. There's just been far too much uproar over the last couple of years. Next up, speaking of standings, speaking of overtime, I think that we need to implement continuous overtime, as well as a backcourt red line rule in overtime. When looking at it, it occurs far too much. It makes 3-on-3 overtime far too annoying to watch at times when teams are in the offensive zone. Just bring it out, reset, get some fresh bodies out there, completely kill any offensive momentum for a solid 15, 20 seconds. It sucks. It absolutely sucks. So making a backcourt red line rule where if you have possession of the puck, you can't go past the red line, you can't reset. I think that would result in a far more enjoyable, entertaining 3-on-3, the 3-on-3 that we expected when this rule change happened. And it was a good rule change. It was a very good rule change going down to 3-on-3, but there's clearly problems with 3-on-3, and I think making a backcourt rule would really help that. And adding the backcourt rule as well as continuous 3-on-3, I think most of these overtimes would end definitely under 10 minutes. You might once or twice a season get an overtime that goes 15, 20 minutes. Again, I don't think 5-on-5 continuous overtime is at all feasible, but 3-on-3 continuous, it does make sense, especially if you have measures in place to reduce the overtimes going longer and being less action filled. So I think backcourt rule and continuous overtime would be very good. Next up, everybody's favorite topic, LTIR. When looking at LTIR, obviously teams are using this to their advantage in terms of throwing players before the deadline there. Then they're ready to go game one, Kucherov, Stone. So when looking at this, I don't think you should abolish LTIR. I think most of the time it is used for what's intended for. Looking at guys like Jake Muzzin, Carey Price, Ryan Ellis, never going to play again in the NHL. It makes sense that these teams are able to get out of their cap hit. Imagine if the Leafs were still paying like $5.5 million. The Canadians had a 10. Canadians doesn't really matter because they suck, but they're rebuilding. But $10.5 million cap hit. It does make sense. And then looking at it this year, the Rangers, Filipino, obviously not going to come back. It makes sense that they get some of his money back, but it's obviously been exploited by some teams. So my fix for this would be, if guys are not activated by the last game of the regular season, they need to serve half of what the regular season LTIR punishment is. In the regular season right now, if you go on LTIR, you're out for either 10 games or 24 days. Obviously 24 days if you get placed like before Christmas, then there's not a bunch of games. But 10 games or 24 days. I think if you're not activated by then, if your team is not cap compliant with guys not on LTIR, the final games of the regular season. I think that you have to sit out 5 games or 12 days to start the playoffs. I think that makes sense. I think that would discourage teams from the Vegas Golden Knights sitting out Mark Stone. When looking at it, would they go 5 games without Mark Stone in that first round against the Edmonton Oilers? I think they'd be a lot more hesitant to do that and open up that salary cap. So I don't think we should get rid of LTIR, but we definitely need some type of punishment for these guys that are placed on it and then ready to go at game 1. There needs to be some type of punishment, and I think a 5-game, 12-day overall kind of stretch would be a good idea for the NHL to implement, because you can't really do the salary cap in the playoffs, considering players don't get paid in the playoffs. That's the whole problem with that. So I think this kind of resolve would be a decent solution in terms of LTIR. Next up, number 4, my one that is probably going to get shit on. I understand why. This just irks me. It's irked me for so long. I hate the double retention when it comes to trades. When looking at it, the fact you can get a guy like Ryan O'Reilly that's making like $7.5 million at 1.875, or Patrick Kane at like 2.7 off his $10.5 million cap hit. I don't like it. I understand why it happens. You still need to broker a deal with the third team, but you give up like a 4th or a 5th round pick to save like $2.5 million in cap space. That's such an easy no-brainer. And obviously a team that's out of it that has a retention spot is going to do that. So when looking at it, I personally would get rid of it. I understand it's going to be a hot take. I'm not. If I was commissioner of the NHL, I probably wouldn't propose it. But just speaking from the heart, I try to be authentic. I hate it. I don't like it. And I understand people do. But next up, back to more consensus, less hot takes of changes. I am a fan of incentivizing the draft lottery in terms of teams winning. Right now, obviously, teams just tank. Teams, once they're eliminated, just try to lose as many games as possible, boost up those draft odds. Get rid of that system. I am all for the system of once you're eliminated. The PWHL also smartly adopted this in their first season, even though they only have 6 teams, 4 teams make the playoffs, so it's only 2 teams battling in this. But when looking at it, once they add more teams, it'll be very interesting to watch. With the draft lottery, my system would be once you're eliminated, you start accumulating points in order to finish. If you have the most points once you're eliminated, so different teams, so the teams that barely missed the playoffs are only going to have like 2 to 3 games, 1 game maybe even, to accumulate points for their draft lottery to finish higher in draft lottery. So when looking at this, the Blackhawks, the Sharks were eliminated in early March. Blackhawks have actually been pretty good, 5-5. So they'd be leading this still by far. Sharks not so much. They've been losing a lot of games. So I think that this overall system of incentivizing teams once they're eliminated, you got to start racking up points if you want to finish high in the draft lottery. I think that would be a really cool system, because right now, again, teams just don't give a shit. And when looking at it, it affects the postseason race when you consider teams coming to town with teams that are eliminated, that are battling for a wild card spot. One team that's battling for a wild card, one team that's been eliminated. It's an easy game because they don't give a shit. So when looking at it, I think doing this would be cool because it would incentivize every team in the NHL for the final month of the season to be competitive. And when looking at this, I would put in some type of safeguards. I would say you can only jump 3 spots and you can only fall 3 spots. Because right now, again, the San Jose Sharks have 3 points since they've been eliminated since March 13th. That's been like 10, 12 games. So for them, I wouldn't have them fall all the way back to having the 8th or 9th best odds in the draft lottery. Furthest that they could drop is 4th relative to where they finished at the league standings. You can only finish 3 spots up. But I think this would be a really cool idea. And again, the whole point of playing hockey, NHL, is winning games. Why don't we incentivize our draft lottery structure to be like that? I think that makes a lot of sense. And especially with those safeguards of only being able to jump 3 or fall 3, I think makes a lot of sense. Next up, another one that's pretty consensus, offsides reviews, man. When looking at this, if a goal is scored any further than like 8-10 seconds after a potential offsides happens by inches, you should not be able to review that, man. If it doesn't have a direct impact on the play, someone just entering the zone and they're slightly offsides, and then they just cycle the puck around for 20, 25 seconds, and then they score a goal, then you go to review it, and it gets called back. I hate that. It's horrible. It slows down the game. It doesn't really impact the overall play. Get rid of that. Just get rid of offsides reviews if it's not detrimental to a guy immediately getting the puck after being slightly offsides. It shouldn't be able to be reviewed. Just get rid of it. I hate it. Number seven. We got 1 through 8. This is pretty obvious when looking at this. It's stupid. You look at this season, the 3rd Metro team might have like 89 points this season, versus the division, one of the division winners are going to play the Tampa Bay Lightning. It just sucks. Go to 1 through 8. Perfectly fine. Why do we ever change it? It's just so stupid. We tried to boost up rivalries, but then once we saw the same matchups for like 4 out of 6 years, like Crosby and Ovechkin. Like, it gets tired. Go back to 1 through 8s, have more of these unique matchups in the first round. And just overall, it's a more fair system in terms of teams making the playoffs. I don't think I'm shocking anybody with that rule change. And then lastly, I am a big proponent of a play-in, not a play-in tournament like the NBA. I think there's just too much having the 10th place team potentially being involved. But I think an 8v9 single elimination in both conferences would be very fun to watch. Again, I don't think it would devalue the regular season. And honestly, it would keep some teams alive towards the end of the regular season in terms of the 10th or 11th place teams down the stretch that are usually not close to catching that 8th place team. It would keep them alive in terms of battling. It would be, if you're the 8th or 7th team, you'd be going balls to the wall instead of resting guys like the final game of the season because you're in a wild card spot. If you're that 7th place team, you'd be wanting to get that bye, not playing that playing game. And just overall with an 8v9 game, I hate to burst your bubble, but if you're the 8 seed in that and you play the 9 team and you lose to them, I don't think that that's unfair. If you cannot beat the number 9 team in your conference, you're probably not going on to win the Stanley Cup. I know miracle runs happen, but when looking at it, I don't think that it would massively devalue. If we go to the NBA where it's the 10th seed, that's a little bit too far to me. But in terms of having a 1-game elimination, and again, you're still having 16 teams in the overall actual playoffs. And second off, there used to be 16 out of 22 teams making the playoffs back in the late 80s, early 90s. So missed me with that, like, oh, too many teams to make the playoffs. It has been far higher rates. And especially considering, again, we're keeping the normal 16 teams in the playoffs, add a 1-game play-in, considering, again, we're going to continue to expand by 2030. There's probably going to be 34 teams in the NHL. Give me an 8v9. Give me a 9. Yeah, just give me a 1-game elimination. Who wouldn't want to see that? It'd be fantastic. But let me know in the comments, what do you think? Again, 3-2-1-0 standings, backcourt, red line rule, continuous overtime, LTIR, 5 games or 12 days if they're not activated by the end of the season and their team's cap compliant. Which one's next? Odds. Once you're eliminated, you round up points in order to have the best odds. Offside review. Just get rid of it. It's not directly responsible for the goal actually happening. Double retention, my personal one. I don't like it. 1-through-8. And then a 8v9 play-in. Let me know in the comments, what do you think about these? I think people are only going to heavily disagree with the double retention one. And what other changes? I could have added a bunch of more probably. What other changes would you like to see happen to the NHL? And again, I think a lot of those are feasible in the next, basically once Gary Bettman's out of office and we don't have a boomer as the goddamn commissioner. But I think those are feasible. Let me know in the comments, what do you think? I'll be seeing you in the next one.